Is that Peggy? Are you making those noises?
This first story was making its rounds on the internet for a while, the doll that aged. So it all started with a regular baby girl doll that a young girl played with every day, but as time passed and the girl grew up, she played with the doll less and less, until eventually it was tucked away in the attic and forgotten about for over a decade. Sounds like the beginning of like Toy Story, but this is kind of like the horror version. So fast forward to when the parents decide to clear out the attic, they're looking for the old doll, but when they finally find it, they're completely shocked and horrified to find that the doll, which had been left untouched for years, now looked like this. Just kinda different from how they remembered it. I mean, in what world would anyone ever purchase something as horrific looking as that for their young daughter? Unless, you know, you're me, because that's a reaction I would just love to see on Christmas morning. The once sweet baby doll now had this ghoulish, shriveled appearance. I mean, it looks worse than the Crypt Keeper. Horrified, the parents quickly got rid of the doll. They didn't burn it in a fire like you'd probably expect though. Instead, they took the time to actually sell this monstrosity. And managed to. Next we have mourning dolls. And that's not like early mourning, I mean the death kind of mourning. Mourning dolls were a thing in the Victorian era, and back in those days life was incredibly tough, especially with the rampant diseases that led to high mortality rates a lot of the time in younger people. To cope with the loss of young loved ones, some families created these unique dolls known as Victorian mourning dolls. These were actually made for the parents, keepsakes designed to honor and remember their deceased daughters or sons. They were usually made from materials like wax or porcelain and dressed in black clothing to symbolize mourning and death. And even more depressing, they were handcrafted to look just like the youngsters who just croaked, with great attention to detail, and they'd usually put them on display where they used to play. Good lord. I get the idea of creating this tangible thing that's meant to keep their spirit alive, I guess, but man, that is morbid. To say that some of these things must have been cursed would be an understatement. Oh, mannequins, don't they just make you want to leave the store immediately? A lot of the time they're just faceless figures now, but they used to be a lot creepier when they were made to look more like people, with like eyes and noses and lips. Well, no mannequin hits that unsettling uncanny valley thing more than La Pascualita, an eerie mannequin that's become a must-see attraction in Mexico. This mannequin is known for its very lifelike appearance, and some people believe it might be more than just a display piece. The story goes that La Pascualita was modeled after the daughter of the bridal shop's original owner. She tragically died on her wedding day after being bitten by a poisonous insect. Heartbroken, the mother commissioned the mannequin in her likeness as a way to remember her. But there's always been this rumor or urban legend that La Pascualita isn't a mannequin at all, but a preserved corpse. Some claim they've seen her move or even heard her whisper. Plus the thing is just so eerily lifelike, especially for a mannequin. I mean, just look at that hand. Ugh. This story went viral when a TikToker named Jessie V did a video on it, but the ordeal had actually been filmed for TV before that. So this is the story of Mr. Ted, a haunted teddy bear that sent a man to the hospital. Mr. Ted once belonged to a psychic medium named Debbie Davis who claimed that the bear had some unsettling vibes. According to her, Mr. Ted had been known to cause nausea in people and even make growling sounds. So, you know, what do you do with a growling bear that makes you vomit? Well, you take it to a haunted castle, of course, because why not? Bolsover Castle is famous for being one of the most haunted castles in England. A team of 3 volunteers then agreed to spend the night in the castle with Mr. Ted just to see if there was any truth to the story. They set up their experiment with Mr. Ted sitting on a chair next to them as they tried to get some sleep. Paranormal expert Joe Lockwood was on hand, observing from a nearby room. Well, around 3 a.m., the team lost connection with a camera, and during this weird period, one of the producers working on the TV experiment suddenly fell ill and had to go to the hospital. After this, the bear was buried in a secret location about 30 miles from its owner's home in Manchester. Fingers crossed it doesn't crawl out of its grave to growl and upset any other innocent stomachs ever again. Okiku is a haunted doll from Japan with a really tragic backstory. In 1918, a young man named Daikichi Suzuki bought a doll for his young sister, Okiku. She fell in love with it right away and took it everywhere she went. But sadly, Okiku caught the yellow fever and died just a year later, still clutching the doll in her arms. Her family built an altar for her and placed the doll there to honor her memory. But people started noticing that the doll's hair, which had been neatly styled, seemed to grow. They saw split ends and longer strands, and along with this, the family experienced odd happenings in their home. There'd be flickering lights, loud bangs, and whispers, especially around significant dates, like Okiku's birthday, or the anniversary of her death. In 1938, the family moved, but decided to leave the doll behind, feeling it belonged near their daughter's resting place. They gave it to a local temple where it remains to this day, and yes, the hair supposedly continues to grow. Looking at this puppet, would you ever think twice about sleeping in the same room with it? It looks pretty innocuous, right? Well, according to paranormal investigator Jane Harris from Stourbridge, West Midlands, that wouldn't be advised. She'd acquired the doll from a guy named John who claimed that the wooden puppet tried to choke him in the middle of the night. So Harris decided to keep a camera on the thing throughout the night to try and see if it got up to any mischief. Well, one night, it did. On camera, she captured the string with the cross attached, which operates the puppet, slowly moving upright on its own before falling back down in the case. Harris stated, "I've never had anything as exciting as this. I've caught pictures of mists, orbs, and shadows, but nothing as physical as this video evidence." The previous owner, John, had grown up with the puppet, which belonged to his father. He said he never liked it either, that it always gave him the creeps, and that whenever friends came to visit, they'd never want to get near it. And then, of course, there's the choking incident. After John's father had died, he was clearing out his belongings, but ended up keeping the puppet, which he left on the drawer by his bed. And that very night, the incident occurred. He said, quote, "I was wide awake in bed and thought I saw a shadow move from one side of the window to the other, and worried something was trying to scare us. Then, without warning, my throat suddenly went really tight. I've never had anyone's hands around my throat before, so it was really scary. I tried to wake my wife, but it took her ages to come around. When she did, I remember looking straight at the puppet sitting on the drawer near our bed and realizing it was him." We've all heard of Robert the Doll. Well, how about a spooky first-hand account? This story comes from Reddit user Sublime Sloth, who posted this story along with a photo. They wrote, "Long story short, friend's sister went to the Robert the Doll exhibit in Key West and didn't believe the curse. Apparently flicked it off and took a photo without asking permission. Started having terrible luck. Photos messed up, eerie feelings of being watched, etc. This photo was taken after a conversation talking about how she felt that Robert was following her and had something to do with her string of bad luck. Someone jokingly took the photo after invoking Robert's name to see what would happen. 100% real and not photoshopped. She immediately wrote a letter apologizing to the doll the next day. Nightmare fuel. Had this photo for years and show it every time the topic of ghosts comes up." I don't know, what do you guys think of this one? Let me know in the comments. Did you get super sick of the movie Frozen 11 years back? God, that was over a decade ago. Well, at least you didn't have to go through what this next family did. In 2013, the Bedonia family in Houston brought an Elsa doll from the movie Frozen for their young daughter. Now, at first, everything was normal. The doll sang and said cute phrases from the movie just like it was supposed to, but then things started getting weird. According to Emily Bedonia, the doll started doing stuff like switching between English and Spanish, and for the next 6 years, the doll never once needed new batteries. Not that it even needed batteries at all, because apparently it would even say things when it was supposed to be off. So naturally, the family decided they'd had enough of Elsa and her weird antics, so they decided to let it go. Good old 11-year-old joke. Anyway, they threw it in the trash, but none of this is the creepy part. A few weeks later, they found Elsa in their basement. They tried to get rid of it again, this time by putting it deep at the bottom of the trash bin right before the garbage was collected. Then they took a short trip out of town, thinking the doll was finally gone, but when they got back, Elsa was sitting in the backyard, like she'd never left. Now you'd think someone was just messing with them, but Emily pointed out that the doll had this distinctive mark from their daughter. The doll sitting in the backyard had that very same mark. This is Harold, full name Harold the Haunted Doll. And it's pretty easy to see why. I'd have some serious questions for whatever youngster would ever want to spend time playing with this thing. In 2003, a young man came across Harold at a flea market and felt this immediate urge to buy him for some reason. It was worn and shabby, but the man bargained with the seller and eventually paid $20 for it. But before he could leave, the old man selling the doll stopped him and insisted he hear the doll's eerie backstory. The man revealed that Harold was a gift he'd given to his own son, who tragically died shortly after receiving it. After his son's death, the old man kept Harold in his room, and that's when strange things began to happen. He would hear singing and laughter coming from the room when no one else was around. Frustrated and scared by the constant disturbances, the old man tried to burn the doll, but it wouldn't catch fire. The redditor decided to take the doll home anyway, and things got weird almost immediately. He started experiencing severe migraines, something he had never dealt with before. And a couple days later, his cat died. He began hearing the same voices and laughter that the old man had described as well. But even with all this happening, he decided to keep Harold, but he stuffed him in a suitcase, out of sight, out of mind. And I guess he couldn't burn it, he already knew. But I would have definitely not kept it in a suitcase. I would have driven it out of town and left it in the woods. The Swamp Dolls. That sounds like a great name for a band, but you know, that's not where I'm going with this thing. So in 2014, police in Alabama stumble on a very odd scene in Bear Creek Swamp. They find 21 dolls, most of them antique porcelain, all stuck on bamboo stakes and standing upright in the middle of the swamp. The dolls were discovered on land owned by a timber company, but when the police tried to reach out to the company to get some answers, they never got a response. The police also tried to track down who put the dolls there, but they came up empty-handed. Now, this wouldn't be all that eerie if Bear Creek Swamp didn't already have somewhat of a spooky reputation. People who visit the swamp have reported hearing disembodied voices, seeing strange orbs, and even spotted unidentified creatures. There's also an old legend that says the swamp is haunted by a grieving mother who's endlessly searching for her lost daughter. But believe in ghosts or not, it's hard to deny that finding a bunch of old dolls on stakes in a swamp is kind of unsettling. I do have to wonder what's going on in that town though, because I feel like if I was a cop and I was called to a scene where there were dolls on stakes, I'd be like, I think there's something else probably better I could be doing with my time. Maybe that's just me though. The Twilight franchise is full of awkward performances and poorly written dialogue, but the scariest thing to come out of it may be a doll that was used on set. In Breaking Dawn Part 2, Bella and Edward's daughter, Renesmee, was a doll. She wasn't supposed to be a doll in the story, they just decided it would be easiest to use a doll on set instead of a real human being, which I mean, sure, but easier doesn't always make something better. And in the case of this movie, the prop was downright nightmarish. If I had a daughter that came out looking like that, it wouldn't be good. Anyway, apparently this prop doll doesn't just look creepy, it is creepy. By that I mean the cast said they thought the thing was downright haunted and hated being around it. So much so that it was nicknamed Chucky Smee. It now sits in the Forever Twilight collection in Forks, Washington, which displays a whole bunch of props and wardrobe from the movies. Staff will say they see the doll moving around on her own, often being found in different positions in the glass case. Staff will see her standing up straight one day, only to come in the next day with her sitting or in some weird position.
Next on our list today, we have The Doll in a Painting, the intersection where creepy artwork and cursed dolls meet. In 1972, with a rapidly approaching deadline, artist William Stoneham decided to use a poem that his wife had written him as the inspiration for his next painting, this painting, which he called The Hands Resist Him. It was a physical reminder of William's upbringing and his time spent with his adoptive parents. What he saw as beautiful seriously creeped out the public. The young man in the painting, representative of William, stands next to a dead-eyed doll, holding something that appears to have frayed wires coming out of the top. And in the windows behind the two, hands can be seen reaching out towards them, pressed against the glass. The painting was eventually sold to John Marley at an event attended by Henry Seldes and William Stoneham himself. All three men died shortly after. In 2000, the painting became popular once more when its owners listed it for sale on eBay, claiming that their daughter had seen the man and doll in the painting fight, and that at one point the family had even witnessed the man go missing from the painting after he climbed right off the canvas in the middle of the night. The family selling the painting was also looking for someone to bless their home after the piece was gone. I don't blame them, it's really creepy to look at.
In a museum in the town of Quesnel, British Columbia, there's a doll named Mandy that likes to follow people with her eyes, and these are not the kind of eyes you want to have following you around a room. Just take a look at this monstrosity. Yeah, keep it the hell away from me, please. Even without all the stories about it, I'd still be creeped out having this thing around. Mandy was gifted to the Quinault Museum and Archives in 1991. The doll is now about a century old, and the donor had received it from her grandmother. It had been locked in a trunk for years, but when she took it out, she felt that something was just off about the doll. Wonder why. She decided to donate it to the museum. When Mandy arrived, the staff photographed her to add her to the collection and left her in the lab overnight. The next morning, they found the lab in complete disarray, as if someone had thrown a big temper tantrum. Another strange event occurred later when a stuffed lamb given to Mandy to keep her company was found outside of her locked case. Visitors also report odd experiences. One person from Calgary tried to videotape Mandy but couldn't get the camera to work, though it worked fine everywhere else in the museum. Another visitor from Surrey returned home to find her house had been broken into, with only one item missing, being a porcelain doll. A local reporter was developing photos of Mandy in the basement lab, heard footsteps upstairs, and then his contact sheet jammed in the machine, something that had never happened to him before. And of course, a lot of museum visitors will swear that Mandy's eyes follow them as they move around.
Next up, we've got Harold, who was purchased by a young man attending a flea market in 2003. As soon as he spotted the doll, the young man knew he had to have it. He went back and forth with the old man selling it, but eventually the two settled on $20 for the dilapidated Harold. The young man began to walk away with his purchase, but the old man chased after him, insisting that the young man know the origins of the doll that was now in his possession. The old man told of how the doll, Harold, had been given to his own son as a gift, but that his son died shortly after. After his son's death, the old man kept Harold in his room, but whenever he walked by, he would hear the sounds of singing and laughter, even though there was no one there. Eventually, the old man became sick of the taunting and he tried to burn the doll, but Harold wasn't having it. He wouldn't burn. Despite the old man's warnings, the young man took the doll home. That night, he began having severe migraines, something he had never experienced in the past. And then, 2 days later, his cat died. After that, he began hearing voices and laughter, just as the old man claimed to have heard himself. Despite what the young man was experiencing, he couldn't give up that connection with Harold, and he decided to keep the doll, but he locked him away in a suitcase for safe measure, where he remains to this day, just waiting for the moment someone lets him out.
Next up, we have what is described as a possessed demon doll currently up for auction on eBay. And at the time of this video coming out, you only have till tomorrow to place your bids, so get on there and get your dollars in. The seller described how the doll, whose name is Valerie, has scratched her and her husband on more than one occasion. She says in the item description that she keeps her away and hidden in the water heater closet, and that if the doll is left out or if she dares to look into its eyes, there are consequences. Saying if you just glance at her vessel, some type of mark will show up on your body. The seller also notes that the doll will be bound and blindfolded when shipped out, which is for the seller's protection during packaging and for your protection as you open the package. So it sounds like an easy sell to me. Ditch the tickle me Elmo that you have to tickle and snag this possessed demon doll that will scratch you instead.
Next up, we have the Victorian doll, which was purchased alongside two others by Debbie and Cameron Merrick, and which was also featured on the This Morning show. You see, one day Debbie and Cameron made the decision to purchase 3 old Victorian dolls for the low price of just $5 and their sanity. Shortly after they purchased the dolls and moved them into their home, strange things started to happen. The fire alarm would go off constantly and continuously, despite no smoke or fire being present in the home, and Cameron began waking up with tiny scratches all over his legs. One day, one of the doll's necklaces disappeared, and Debbie and Cameron came to the conclusion that this doll must be possessed. After speaking about their experiences online, the pair, along with their possessed Victorian doll, were invited to the morning show. The couple spoke about their experiences since purchasing the doll when all of a sudden the rocking chair next to them where the doll was sitting began to move on live TV. After the incident, the pair were positive that the thing was possessed, and so they sold it to a paranormal investigator by the name of Lee Steer, who claims that shortly after purchasing the doll, the lights in his home began acting up. His paintings began swinging on their hooks, and strange scratches were appearing on his arm. He also claimed that at one point the doll possessed a random word app that shows the user words at random to tell Steer that her name was Samantha and that she hated men. Probably not the best thing to be keeping in a bachelor pad.
This story comes to us from Reddit user ApprehensiveCost806, who asked the fine people of Reddit to help them with a doll they believed might have been haunted. So they wrote, "I like to go charity shopping a lot. You can find amazing things there for even better prices. In my most recent shop, I found a really cute doll. I saw it and I knew I wanted it. It was so cute. For context, I've always been 50-50 when it comes to the supernatural, but since I've got this doll, I've noticed whistling from behind me whenever the doll has been in the same room. I play it off as someone outside whistling, but something else has happened. I was showering and usually leave the door slightly open if I'm home alone, as my dogs always find some way to misbehave. This way I can keep a better eye on them. My dogs started barking uncontrollably, and I thought it was someone outside. I couldn't stop them from barking. I ended my shower to check the door. When I got out, I noticed my dog nervously barking at my bedroom door, where the doll is. I decided to go to my room and check it out. Usually my dogs willingly run into my room and get comfy on my bed or chew what they can find. They wouldn't. They both stood there barking. I'm well aware that animals are deemed to be more sensitive towards the supernatural, and I'm aware of my dog's behavior enough to know that this was unusual."
Next up, we've got Ruby, who currently travels with the Traveling Museum of Paranormal and Occult, but once lived with a young woman who long ago got very sick. The young woman loved Ruby. She was her most favorite possession, and so when the young woman died, Ruby was passed down through generations of the woman's family. Many family members who kept Ruby would put her in a box because they found the doll to be just a tad bit creepy. Those who decided to brave the Ruby storm and keep the doll out on a shelf or chair reported having often heard strange noises coming from the room in which the doll was being kept. Many have also said that they have heard Ruby walking around and also experienced nausea and headaches while in the doll's presence. Those who visit the doll at the museum today are drawn to Ruby, and almost half of the people who walk past her are compelled to take her in their arms and rock her back and forth as though they are trying to soothe her. When they are made aware of their actions, they're shocked, appearing as though they have no recollection of how the doll had gotten into their arms in the first place. Other visitors have gone home with photos of the doll on their phone, even though they swear they have no memory of taking any.
Alright, next up we have Violet the Haunted Doll, who was purchased by Reddit user Abandoned Explorer 21, who stumbled on the doll at a yard sale. The doll was offered for free with a note claiming it was haunted. The user asked the owner why she believed the doll was haunted. The owner said that she had bought the doll at a thrift store for her daughter, who named it Violet. Strange things began happening almost immediately though. The owner heard her daughter arguing with someone she claimed was Violet. One day while her daughter was out, the owner heard a girl's voice coming from the daughter's room. She found Violet in the center of the room and moved her to the bed. As she walked away though, she saw the fridge magnets had been arranged to spell hi. Then a music box in the living room started to play before she heard the door to her daughter's room slam on its own. So terrified, she waited outside until her husband returned, and when they re-entered the house, they saw Violet on the coffee table. The husband tossed Violet into the shed, where she stayed until the yard sale. So the Redditor decided to take Violet home. After all that, for almost a month, nothing unusual happened, but then one night the user felt someone sit down on the foot of the bed, but nobody was there. A few days later, while making a sandwich, the user heard a girl's voice whisper, "Hey." This was followed by giggling from the bedroom, where Violet had mysteriously moved to the bed. Now wanting to investigate, the Redditor bought an EMF detector and spirit box. The EMF detector showed high readings near Violet. After 2 weeks of static on the spirit box, the user finally heard hi and get the thing. Went back to the seller, asked him if there was anything that had been attached to the doll. The seller said maybe it was referencing the music box, and gave it to them. During a spirit box session, a girl's laugh and a man's voice saying devil ended up coming through. So now fearing, the whole devil thing, she ended up throwing Violet into the backyard, and the next day found that she had moved closer to the house. So finally the user put her in a storage unit, never taking her out again after that.
And finally, we have Leta. In 1972, a man named Kerry Walton was visiting his hometown in Australia for his grandfather's funeral and decided to check something off his bucket list. There was an old abandoned building in the town that for years he was too afraid to even go near, but on this visit, he felt compelled to finally face his fears and enter the home. While searching around the home, he found an old marionette doll underneath the porch, and he felt the urge to take it home with him. Feeling a strange energy coming from the doll, Walton decided to bring it to a psychic, where he learned of its origin. It had been made 200 years prior to Walton finding the doll by a Romanian woman for her son who had drowned. Oh, and it also housed his soul. The hair on the marionette's head was real, it was that of the boys, and underneath its removable scalp was the likeness of a human brain. After the visit to the psychic, Walton began hearing noises coming from the doll that he could faintly make out to be the screams of a young man saying, "Let me out." He named the doll Leta and brought it to his antique shop, but the doll was not for sale. Walton liked Leta a lot because he believed that the marionette was bringing him good fortune. But the doll was not without its quirks. Whenever Leta was taken outside, it would rain, and when Leta was brought into a room, pictures would fall off the walls. Dogs would also get aggressive while in the presence of the doll and try to attack those around them, and many people also reported feelings of inexplicable fear and sadness whenever they got close to it. Walton has also said that the doll will often change positions when left alone and emit a pulse when held, as though it is somehow still alive.
Annabelle is certainly the most famous of all of the dolls on this list today. With countless articles and videos and even an entire movie franchise, it is no wonder we know about Annabelle's horrifying essence. Before Annabelle was sealed behind a protective case in Ed and Lorraine Warren's occult museum, it was an innocent-looking Raggedy Ann doll gifted to Deidre Bernard by her mother. However, the doll's behavior soon turned sinister. Deidre would come home to find its limbs moved into different positions, even after she deliberately crossed them. Things then escalated quickly. Annabelle began moving to different rooms, leaving eerie notes, and even appearing with bloodstains. After consulting a medium, Deidre learned of a little girl's spirit, Annabelle Higgins, who claimed to have taken residence in the doll. Touched by the story, Deidre granted the spirit permission to stay, but the Warrens soon revealed that this was no innocent child. It was, in fact, a demonic entity using the doll to wreak havoc, leaving one of Deidre's friends severely injured. After a harrowing exorcism, the Warrens took Annabelle with them, but strange accidents followed, including the death of a priest who mocked the doll. Now locked in a glass case, Annabelle is a chilling reminder of the evil that can lie behind seemingly innocent objects. The shadow doll is one of the eeriest and most dangerous items in Ed and Lorraine Warren's occult museum. Unlike the infamous Annabelle, this doll was never meant to look innocent. Its twisted form was crafted using human and animal bones through dark occult rituals. The doll was believed to have the ability to project itself into the dreams of those who dared to even look at a photo of it. Sorry in advance for all of the photos you've just seen. But these weren't just ordinary nightmares. These visions were so horrifying that they could cause heart attacks or leave victims terrified of ever sleeping again. The doll has even been linked to several mysterious deaths, and some who encountered it woke up with scratches on their bodies. While the Warrens were able to contain it, the doll remains too dangerous to destroy. It's said that any attempt to do so would unleash the malevolent spirits tied to its creation, which is why it now sits locked away, waiting in the Warrens Museum. A true relic of evil, the shadow doll reminds us that some curses are best left undisturbed. Deep in the woods of Connecticut, a strange and eerie doll stood abandoned, waiting to be discovered. A man walking through the forest was the first to encounter it, and he described an overwhelming sense of weakness and dread, as if the doll was draining his energy. After fleeing the unsettling figure, he encountered an old man in a black cloak who guided him out of the forest. While the origin of the doll remains a mystery, Lorraine Warren declared it as one of the most terrifying paranormal objects she'd ever come across, which I think says a lot. After taking it to their occult museum, she experienced terrifying phenomena, including levitation and falling into a catatonic state for days. The doll, with its lean, horned figure, may not look terrifying at a first glance, but its connection to dark rituals make it a powerful and dangerous artifact. Known as voodoo dolls or witch dolls, these two eerie figures were feared for their ability to attack the weakest and make their victims sick, even to the point of death. One doll had a noose around its neck, while the other's piercing eyes seemed to stare into the soul. A doll collector unknowingly brought these cursed dolls into her home, and soon after, her son's health began to deteriorate mysteriously. Despite locking the dolls away, they continued to wreak havoc, causing her son's condition to worsen despite no medical explanation. Desperate, the collector contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, who immediately sensed the malevolent force behind the dolls and removed them. Afterward, her son's health improved. The dolls were placed in the Warrens' occult museum for safekeeping, but one night, after a retired Navy commander broke the museum's protection by touching the dolls, they reappeared in a circle in the Warrens' basement. That same night, the commander suffered a terrible accident, claiming the dolls had been laughing at him as they watched from the shadows. The Devil Made Me Do It dinosaur toy is a particularly intriguing and eerie artifact housed in the Warren Occult Museum with a chilling backstory connected to one of the most unusual legal cases in American history. In 1980, David Glatzel became the center of a supposed demonic possession, which escalated dramatically when his older sister's boyfriend, Arn Cheyenne Johnson, allegedly took on the demon's challenge to leave David and possess him instead. The situation culminated in 1981 when Johnson fatally harmed Alan Bono, claiming the act was committed under demonic influence. This case marked the first time in US history that a defendant used demonic possession as a legal defense. The Warrens, deeply involved in this case, spent time with Johnson and his family, supporting the idea that a demonic force was indeed at play. Despite their efforts, the court dismissed the demonic possession defense, which fair enough, and it led to Johnson's conviction and a 5-year prison sentence, which is also kind of crazy when you consider the fact that he killed somebody. The trial and its supernatural claims were later dramatized in the film The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. Why did I just explain all of this? Well, back to the cursed dinosaur toy. Among the strange occurrences reported during the possession was the bizarre behavior of David Glatzel's dinosaur toy, which was said to have levitated and ominously warned the family, quote, "You're all gonna die." This unsettling toy, now on display in the museum, is kept in an open container surrounded by rosary beads and other protective items, reflecting the Warrens' belief in its connection to the dark forces involved in the case. Next up, meet Gertrude, one of the lesser known but equally sinister dolls in Ed and Lorraine Warren's haunted collection. Though she doesn't share the fame of Annabelle, Gertrude's dark history is no less terrifying. Sitting quietly in the museum, her innocent appearance hides the malevolent energy attached to her. According to those familiar with her story, Gertrude has a way of unsettling visitors. Cold chills, whispers in the air, and strange shadows have all been reported near her display. Some claim that her eyes seem to follow you as you move, while others have experienced nightmares after coming too close. Like many of the cursed objects the Warrens collected, Gertrude is kept under careful protection to prevent her sinister influence from escaping. Okay, I gotta be honest. This doll is not in the Warren Occult Museum, and as far as I can tell, it is not one that has even been investigated by the Warrens, but the photos of this thing have creeped me out ever since I first saw it, and I just had to talk about it on today's list. Mr. Fritz, a haunted ventriloquist doll, has found his final resting place in the private collection of alternative entertainer Michael Diamond. While not connected to Ed and Lorraine Warren, Mr. Fritz shares the same eerie reputation as some of the most infamous haunted objects. Discovered in an antique mall in Myrtle Beach, the doll's unsettling presence has haunted every owner since the end of World War II. Originally crafted by Private Billy Booth to entertain fellow Allied prisoners of war at the German camp Stalag 2B, Mr. Fritz was made from newspaper and potato starch, a testament to the resourcefulness of prisoners during those incredibly harsh times. Billy and Mr. Fritz raised the morale of their fellow captives, even amusing some of the guards, until Billy's tragic execution just weeks before the camp was liberated. After the war, Mr. Fritz made his way back to the US as a relic of Billy's legacy, but how he ended up in a US antique mall remains a mystery. Once brought to the UK by a World War II memorabilia dealer, strange occurrences began to follow. The doll's display case would mysteriously open, its eyes and mouth would shift positions, and eventually it was banished to a shed after frightening people with ghostly laughter. I think that's a fair place to draw the line. When Michael took ownership of the doll, these oddities continued, leading him to capture footage of Mr. Fritz's case opening on its own. Though his face is peeling and his body is little more than a mounted head, Mr. Fritz's influence is still very much alive. Now locked away in Diamond's freak room, alongside other bizarre artifacts, the doll's haunted reputation endures. The African fertility dolls, now housed in Ed and Lorraine Warren's occult museum, are shrouded in an unsettling history of black magic. These dolls were once in the possession of a powerful African witch doctor who, through dark rituals, imbued them with mystical energies. In certain regions of Africa, black magic is a deeply rooted practice, and one witch doctor was said to possess a collection of dolls with powerful energies through these rituals. These dolls, created with the intention to both harm and heal, were used by the witch doctor to manipulate the fates of individuals. According to legend, the dolls could bring about life or death, helping those who sought aid, or in more sinister cases, being used as tools of destruction. The dolls were believed to be able to curse their targets, leading to illness, suffering, and even death. While they were sometimes used for fertility rituals, bringing blessings of childbirth, they also carried a dark side, representing the dual nature of magic itself. Believing that the dolls were tied to black magic practices, the Warrens removed them to prevent further harm. Now locked away in the museum, the fertility dolls serve as a stark reminder of how dangerous spiritual forces can be channeled through seemingly innocent objects. The Phantom doll is a chilling artifact from a case where a family was haunted by an unseen entity linked to the doll. The family reported strange and terrifying occurrences, whispers in the dark, unexplained cold spots, and the eerie sight of the doll moving on its own. These disturbances escalated until they felt truly tormented by whatever malevolent force was attached to the doll. Ed and Lorraine Warren investigated and quickly concluded that the doll was acting as a vessel for a spirit, amplifying poltergeist-like activity within the house. After removing the Phantom doll from the home and securing it in their occult museum, the haunting stopped immediately. Now part of their notorious collection, the doll serves as a reminder that even seemingly innocent toys can harbor dangerous, otherworldly energies. Safely locked away, the Phantom doll no longer terrorizes the family, but its presence in the museum still unsettles visitors who dare to get too close. While the Shadow doll is notorious for its eerie presence and ability to haunt people's dreams, there are reports of another lesser-known doll that accompanied it, often referred to as the companion companion. The second doll, also linked to dark occult practices, was believed to enhance the already terrifying power of the shadow doll. Though not as widely recognized, the companion doll was said to be equally malevolent, causing not only nightmares but physical harm to those who encountered it. People claimed to wake up with unexplained scratches and bruises, as if the doll's dark energy manifested in more direct and violent ways. Together, the two dolls created a potent and dangerous combination, amplifying each other's cursed powers. While the shadow doll is the one most discussed, the existence of its sinister partner in the same case adds an even darker layer to the already frightening story.
Robert the Doll, an old life-size doll that was made in the early 1900s, now housed at the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. Now, aside from its age, why is it housed in a museum? Why wasn't it lost to time like so many other dolls and toys from the era? Well, Robert the Doll is said to be one of the most cursed dolls in the entire world, and if you do decide to visit, you're advised to follow a set of guidelines. First and foremost, you have to be respectful. It's said that if you disrespect Robert, you'll be cursed with bad luck, and if you want to take a picture of him, you need to ask him politely first. The museum is constantly receiving apology letters to Robert from former guests who have had strings of bad luck after disrespecting the doll. As for what the bad luck is, well, people have blamed Robert for minor inconveniences to full-on car accidents. So, let's get into the stories from specific folks who've had negative run-ins with this infamous doll. Ozzy blamed an entire year of bad luck on Robert the Doll. In 2019, Ozzy, who was 71 at the time, suffered a bad fall, a neck surgery, an infection in his hand, and was even hospitalized for the flu. This was after his son Jack had reintroduced Ozzy to Robert in an episode of The Osbournes Want to Believe, where Jack sets out to convince his parents about the existence of all things strange and paranormal. Ozzy took one look at the doll, threw it to the ground, and was like, "Not him again." His first encounter with Robert was in 2017 for an episode of another reality show, Ozzy and Jack's World Tour. Anyone ever heard of this show? I haven't. Just another one to add to the list. The Osbournes, man, they must have the highest number of reality shows in existence. Anyway, in the episode, Ozzy and Jack hit up the East Martello Museum in Key West, where Robert the Doll is displayed, and in the very next episode, Ozzy was set to sing the Star-Spangled Banner at a NASCAR event in Texas, and forgot some of the lyrics. Then, of course, there was Ozzy's year of medical misfortune, which he blamed on a haunted doll, rather than, all the stuff from his past that's likely actually the cause of the problems, but I digress. I'm just saying, I'm surprised Ozzy Osbourne is still alive. At the center of this story is a man named Robert Eugene Otto, who often went by Gene. Now, back in 1904, young Gene received this creepy looking doll from his grandfather, who'd purchased it while on a trip in Germany. Gene named the doll Robert and immediately became attached to it, but this friendship was outright toxic. Now, it's said that after Robert got the doll, strange things started happening. Gene would talk to the doll and even claim that the doll would talk back to him, and his parents just laughed all this off at first until they started to hear Gene talking, followed by another voice, a voice too deep and raspy to be their son's. They'd also say the doll would occasionally move on its own or slightly change its expression. And then Gene started blaming Robert the doll for stuff. When things would break or go missing in the house, he'd point at the dead-eyed toy and say Robert did it. But as Gene grew up, he started growing apart from the doll, before finally moving away from home to study art in New York and Paris. The doll sat in the home where passersby would often spot it glaring down at them from the window. Some would even say they'd watch it move. Then came Annette Parker, Robert Eugene Otto's wife. When Gene had finished with his studies in Paris, he married Anne, and the two ended up moving back into the Otto family home in 1930. Gene was thrilled to be reunited with Robert, despite all the odd occurrences he'd had with it when he was younger, but he was very young, and now that he was an adult, he chalked up the experiences to an overactive imagination. Even that time where he woke up in the middle of the night with Robert sitting at the end of his bed. Now, Anne didn't share his sentiment though. She felt uneasy around the doll. She didn't know why, but she just didn't like the thing. Eventually, Anne asked if they could keep it locked away in the attic, and Jean eventually agreed. But that's when the creepiness surrounding Robert the doll became much more clear to Anne. The couple would start hearing footsteps coming from the attic, pacing back and forth. In the dead of the night, they'd hear giggling sometimes from the ceiling and inexplicable knocks. And then friends started to tell them that they'd see Robert sitting in the window of their upstairs bedroom, which Anne knew was just impossible. They'd put him in the attic. When she went to investigate, though, to her horror, there was Robert sitting on the windowsill. Either Jean was playing a trick on her, or there was something very wrong with this doll. As much as Anne would have wanted, though, they never got rid of the doll, and it remained in the house even after both of their deaths. Next came a woman named Myrtle Reuter, who purchased the Otto home in 1974. Robert the doll still lived there, but it was Reuter's daughter who would fall victim to the doll this time. Now, at first, the young girl really liked Robert. She took him wherever she went, and when they sold the house and moved in 1980, Robert came as well. But once they were in the new house, Robert turned sinister again. The girl started telling Myrtle that Robert wanted to hurt her. She'd often wake up in the middle of the night screaming about having seen Robert moving around on his own in her room. And one day, when Myrtle found Robert sitting in a completely different location than he'd been left in, while no one else was in the house, she locked the thing away. And in 1994, she donated him to the museum where he sits to this very day. But the weird stuff hasn't stopped. From Reddit user JMad comes a personal encounter with the infamous doll. Not sure if the museum intentionally does this, but as soon as you enter that room, the atmosphere changes. Now, for people who have not been to this museum, the room is not separated from the rest of the museum in any way. It's open, and you just walk from space to space. But Robert's exhibit is different. Something is off. I didn't have the guts to take his picture, but I wrote a nice little message on the chalkboard behind him, and my brother thanked him as well. But as we were admiring his sailor suit and noticing his ranking, my brother made a joking remark about how our dad outranked him. After we left the East Martello Museum, we went to a beach, and my sister-in-law received a phone call from her mom, who was watching their house, saying that their basement and upstairs toilets had just started backing up, and she thinks it's a septic issue. When she hung up with her mom, her tenants then called and said that their toilet was having issues and needed to be repaired. 2 separate houses in 2 separate states having plumbing issues within minutes of one another. No, there was not a storm happening. When I arrived home roughly a week later, I received word that my job was shutting down in less than 5 days. We didn't even take his picture. Be nice to Robert. From Reddit user DunMiffSYS comes another first-hand account and goes as follows. Me, my wife, and son took a trip to Key West driving down from Orlando. During our visit, we heard about Robert, so we made a visit to the museum on our way out of town. My wife is very superstitious and was really nervous when we got to the Robert exhibit. I was teasing her, and I guess that pissed Robert off. When we went to leave, our car wouldn't start. This was a luxury car, bought new and was less than a year old, so I was really taken aback. My wife was freaking out. AAA arrives and tests the battery. It's dead. He goes to remove it and the battery connectors just crumble because they are so corroded. Says he's never seen connectors that bad. He went to work on the car and I went back into the museum to apologize to Robert. The museum staff wasn't surprised at all about the situation, telling us it happens all the time. So Robert's unsettling reputation has followed him wherever he goes, and that includes the East Martello Museum in Florida. Lucky for visitors of the museum, they get to go home and never see Robert the doll again if they don't want to, but that's not the case for the staff. One of the most common reports from museum staff is that Robert's eyes seem to move on their own. People swear that they see the doll's gaze shifting around the room as if the doll is watching them. There have also been reports of strange noises coming from the display case where he's kept. Sounds of small footsteps or rustling, even when no one else is around. And the chair he sits in will often move. At one point, the staff were so intrigued, they placed markers on the chair's legs just to see if it was really moving, and what they apparently found was that yes, the chair had moved. And, of course, the staff are the ones that need to go through all these apology letters from visitors blaming Robert for their bad luck. In 2019, a team of ghost hunters decided to carry out an investigation at the museum. Of course, they were there specifically for Robert. You could probably imagine what they experienced. They picked up some strange noises on their ghost boxes, they heard some strange noises, cold spots, all stuff that's kinda eerie but not all that exciting. A lot of these sort of things have very rational explanations, but the creepiest thing they spotted was the rising and falling of Robert's chest as if he were breathing. That would have made me sick to my stomach. Now, can Robert the doll mess with you when you're not even in the same room as him? From Reddit user Satan's Mom, we have the faceplant. Never met him, but it's just too weird of a coincidence story. I was on a Comic-Con Urban Legends panel and cracked a joke about Robert being Chucky's lazy grandpa. After the panel, I jumped down 2 feet off the little stage and the strap on my backpack snapped, causing the bag to swing into my arse and made me faceplant and get a nosebleed that would not stop. After about 10 minutes, I said to the screen where his picture was still up, "Sorry Robert, please leave me in peace," and that's when my nose decided to finally clot. I guess the moral of that story is, I don't know, just don't get too cocky and then jump off a stage. Very small stage. Zozo is a name that's become infamous in the world of paranormal activity, especially when it comes to Ouija boards. The legend of Zozo's been around for a long time, but in terms of modern internet popularity, it all started in 2009, when a man named Darren Evans wrote about his supposed experience with a demon on an internet forum for true ghost stories. He said that he'd been using a Ouija board and asked if there was any spirits or entities in the room. The planchette went nuts, going back and forth between the letters Z and O. Then it told him it was going to take his family to paradise, and when he asked what the entity meant, it spelled out hell. A whole bunch of commenters then responded saying they'd also had run-ins with Zozo during their Ouija board sessions. People will often say Zozo might appear playful at first before quickly turning sinister. Once Zozo has established contact, the experiences often escalate to disturbing messages, threats, or aggressive behavior. Reports from those who have dealt with Zozo include sudden mood swings and even full-on physical attacks. What's particularly unsettling is that Zozo seems to show up across different locations, meaning it's not just some local urban legend. People from all over the world have claimed to encounter Zozo. The Black Monk of Pontefract. In the late 60s and early 70s, the Pritchard family, who lived in a house at 30 East Drive on the Checkfield estate in Pontefract, England, began experiencing strange things in their home. The troubles began almost as soon as they moved in. Family, friends were visiting one day when the wife felt an icy breeze. The husband saw white powder falling from the air. But things only got stranger from there. The kitchen floor would often have unexplained puddles of water on it. They even called in a plumber who couldn't seem to explain what was going on. One night, Jean Pritchard and her son were so scared they left the house altogether to stay with a neighbor. They'd witnessed a heavy chest of drawers swaying on its own. But then everything just stopped. For about 2 years. The Pritchards were understandably relieved. Little did they know the activity would resume, and more violently than before. After this sudden lull in activity, the haunting came back, with loud crashes and objects moving on their own. Diane Pritchard, the Pritchard's daughter, claimed she was thrown out of her bed and dragged up the stairs by an invisible force, leaving lacerations on her neck. They even tried to use holy water to cleanse the house. Instead of peace, though, the family reported that the poltergeist, or whatever this thing was, responded by painting upside-down crosses on the walls and doors and destroyed crucifixes in the home. Joe and Jean Pritchard even claimed to see a black cloaked figure with a cowl appearing over their bed, hence the entity being dubbed the Black Monk of Pontefract. On a cold February night in 1855, something bizarre was reported in Devon, England. The so-called Devil's Footprints were a series of unexplained tracks that appeared overnight in the snow. The tracks were reported looking a lot like cloven hooves, and they went on for about 100 miles, crossing over frozen rivers, rooftops, and even walls. Locals were petrified. How were these tracks not only visible on the ground, but also crossing over obstacles like walls and fences without leaving a trace of how they might have gotten over them? When news hit the paper, people were completely flabbergasted. One section read, "It appears on Thursday last night there was a very heavy snowfall in the neighborhood of Exeter in the south of Devon. On the following morning, the inhabitants of the above towns were surprised at discovering the footmarks of some strange and mysterious animal endowed with the power of ubiquity, as the footprints were to be seen in all kinds of unaccountable places, on the tops of houses and narrow walls, in gardens and courtyards, enclosed by high walls and palings, as well in open fields. The superstitious go as far as to believe that they are the marks of Satan himself. So what happened here? Well, one theory is that it was all just a hoax, but how could someone have made the cloven footprints without making any prints of their own? And even if they did manage to find a way, they'd have had to go through quite the effort. To this day, no conclusive evidence was ever found to explain these footprints. The Kumakatok, or door knockers, are told of in Philippine folklore. They're said to appear in the dead of night. They're described as robed figures with their faces obscured by hoods. The trio usually consists of a young woman, a middle-aged man, and an elderly man. It's said that their presence is often associated with death and misfortune. The legend goes that regardless of whether someone even answers the door, the mere visit from the Kumakatok signals impending doom. Typically, the omen is said to affect someone in the household, especially if that person is elderly or already in poor health. There's a belief that the Kumakatok's visit is a sign that death is on its way. As you can imagine, stories of the ominous hooded entities became more widespread during times of big disease outbreaks. In an attempt to ward off the trio, people started painting white crosses on their doors, and this seemed to make them shift their focus from private homes to public buildings like hospitals, government offices, and churches. It's said that the sightings of the Kumakatok have died down since World War II, but the legend continues to be a part of local folklore. In November of 2006, Amy Stamatis, a nurse working at Baptist Health Medical Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, suddenly, strangely, just lost her ability to do her job, which led her to quit. Now, along with this, her physical abilities sharply declined. She couldn't run anymore, for example, a passion she'd had her entire life. And as her mental health continued to deteriorate, she started displaying erratic behavior. She started having public outbursts and would yell at family and friends, seemingly out of nowhere. Then she was seen climbing a 7-story parking ramp, planning to jump, but the police managed to convince her to come down. Later that year, though, Amy did succeed in jumping from her 2nd-story window, which left her paralyzed from the waist down. While she was recovering in the hospital, she was visited by a woman named Cindy Lawson, a Pentecostal evangelist, who made her a very odd offer, an offer she just couldn't refuse. Cindy claimed that she had experience in performing exorcisms. She also believed that Amy was possessed by demons and felt compelled to help her. Lawson claimed to have seen pretty wild things in her previous exorcisms, like people's eye color changing. They'd foam at the mouth, speak in strange demonic voices, but Amy agreed to let Lawson perform an exorcism on her anyway, as scary as it sounded. Amy claimed she didn't remember the exorcism itself, but her family said there was a significant change in her behavior afterward. Unfortunately, she was still paralyzed, but said her outlook had totally changed for the better. The Gottliebin case is a supposed case of a real-life demonic possession. It's pretty well documented, but surprisingly not talked about very often, despite some of the crazy stuff that was said to have gone on. A woman named Gottliebin was reportedly possessed by multiple demons. Didas was born in the early 1800s and lived in the town of Mottlingen. In 1842, she began exhibiting some strange and violent behavior, which she, her family, and virtually the entire neighborhood interpreted as signs of demonic possession. Reports say she would have these violent outbursts, speak in languages she didn't know, and show extreme physical strength. Her condition worsened over time until the family turned to the church for help. A pastor named Johann Christoph Blumhardt began carrying out a series of exorcisms to rid her of the demons she claimed had taken hold of her. Supposedly, during these exorcisms, Didas would exhibit supernatural abilities. She'd levitate and, most gruesomely, vomit things up like bits of glass and nails. And after a long series of exorcisms, Gottliebin finally claimed to be free in 1843. Spring Heel Jack is one of the most bizarre cases in all of Britain. The legend dates back to the 19th century, the earliest reports appearing in the 1830s. About 50 years before Jack the Ripper was terrorizing the streets, there was a possibly inhuman entity known as Spring-Heeled Jack, a mysterious menace who could leap great distances and heights. He was said to wear a dark cloak and a hat, sometimes with devilish horns. Some accounts even describe him having glowing red eyes. It said he would leap out of the shadows to attack unsuspecting victims. He was seen in various locations, especially around London, and his attacks often involved him scratching at his victims before leaping back into the shadows. No one was ever caught or identified as Spring-Heeled Jack, but stories became widespread. He was talked about in newspapers across the country. At one point, there were cases being reported as far as Scotland. So was this a case of a sadistic criminal dressing up as a demonic bat, running off into the night to cause mayhem? Were there copycats? Was this just a case of mass hysteria? Or was there really a demon stalking the streets for that brief moment in time? Every facility with a public bathroom on Earth needs to pay very close attention to this next point. Akaname is a Japanese demon who might just be the creepiest bathroom helper you'll ever hear of. It's a toilet-dwelling, goblin-like creature with slimy hair and these long, nasty toenails. Its tongue is also long and covered in gross, poisonous saliva. Probably the last thing you'd ever want to see when sitting down to do your business. Luckily though, Akaname isn't as dangerous as he looks. The entity is known as the Licker of Filth, not a nickname anyone would probably want to have, but he cleans up messes in bathrooms. He's attracted to grime and scum, and his main job is to lick up all that nasty stuff. Clearly, he doesn't show up in some of the public bathrooms in these parts. Why can't we have a toilet cleaning yokai in this country? I would actually kind of welcome having a golem creature crawling around in the bathrooms if it meant avoiding some of the just downright horrendous things I've seen in public bathrooms over the years. People are just animals. I gotta imagine that this was created as a scare tactic to get youngsters to keep the bathroom clean, and you know what, hey, if it works, some folks could have used some more scaring when they were young, I think. In the quiet town of Hannibal, Missouri is the Mark Twain Cave, and people come from all over the world to see it because it's a cave he's referenced in his work. According to a tale though, there's a demon that's said to dwell in the shadows of the cave. The legend mainly stems from this vast pit with a seemingly endless drop. It's the pit that famously inspired the dramatic death scene of Injun Joe in Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The seemingly endless pit does make for the perfect place for a hellish entity to crawl out of. I can see where the stories come from. Finally though, we have the Mahaha from Inuit folklore. This thing is absolutely twisted. It's almost like the Joker if he was closer to a wild animal and somehow even more sadistic and cruel. A Mahaha is a demonic spirit with a permanent ghastly grin plastered on its face. They're tall, they're thin, they're creatures with terrifyingly wide mouths and long, sharp fingers, which will come into play later. The Mahaha hunts down its victims in the dead of winter, and once it finds someone, it doesn't finish them off quickly. That just wouldn't be fun enough. It plays with them first, using its icy fingers to tickle them until the victim is cut to ribbons by their sharp claws, or they just die from sheer exhaustion, fright, and exposure. So if you ever find yourself out in the freezing Arctic and hear the sound of someone or something chuckling in the distance, you might want to run.